The neon orange fabric stuck to my hands like a melted Halloween tablecloth somebody forgot in the trunk of a car during August. It smelled faintly chemical, like warehouse plastic and dust, and every time I shifted it under the bridal sweetlights, the polyester flashed bright enough to hurt my eyes. The tag hanging from the collar read 2XL in thick black letters. I wear a medium. Across the room, 6 bridesmaids floated around in custom sage green silk dresses that actually fit their bodies. One girl was sipping a mimosa while another adjusted a pearl earring the size of a marble. Somebody laughed about a prenup joke. Somebody else sprayed vanilla dry shampoo into the air. The entire room smelled like expensive champagne, hot curling irons, and money trying too hard to smell effortless. And then there was me, holding what looked like a highway construction flag with sleeves. Madison sat in front of the vanity mirror while a makeup artist dabbed highlighter across her cheekbones. My sister didn't even turn around when she said it. Ugh, that has to be the shipping error dress. She sprayed setting spray over her face with her eyes closed, like this was some tiny inconvenience involving coffee creamer instead of a human being. I looked down at the dress again. You ordered 6 custom silk gowns and 1 neon orange tarp? A couple bridesmaids glanced at each other before immediately pretending not to hear me. Smart women. Weddings turn normal people into hostage negotiators. Madison finally looked at me through the mirror. Not directly. Just enough to check whether I was about to embarrass her. It was probably switched at the warehouse, she said. Can you just make it work? The photographer gets here at 11:30. Make it work. That phrase had basically been my full-time job since age 12. My mother step in before I could answer. Patricia Jensen always moved fast whenever Madison looked even slightly uncomfortable. She crossed the suite in nude heels that probably cost more than my monthly car payment and pressed one manicured finger directly into my shoulder. Don't make a scene, Sarah, she said quietly. The Sterlings are already downstairs. Not let's fix this. Not this is unacceptable. Just pin it. The Sterlings are out there. I stared at her for maybe 3 seconds too long. Long enough for her face to tighten the way it always did when I forgot my assigned role in the family. Madison got elegance. Madison got protection. Madison got second chances wrapped in tissue paper and tied with ribbon. I got instructions. One bridesmaid finally whispered, "Maybe there's another dress somewhere?" Madison sighed dramatically. "There isn't time. God, this day is already stressful enough." That almost made me laugh. I spent 8 months in Kandahar rerouting fuel shipments after a contractor disappeared with 2 transport trucks and $500,000 in diesel. I once coordinated emergency winter supply drops during a sandstorm while a lieutenant threw up into a trash can beside me from heat exhaustion. Last spring, I slept 36 straight hours on a folding cot in Kuwait because 3 separate cargo manifests got flagged by customs at once. But apparently Madison's wedding emergency was me existing in the wrong color palette. I folded the dress over my arm and checked the seams automatically. Cheap stitching, loose threads near the zipper, the kind of polyester that trapped heat instantly. Whoever made this thing probably earned $4 an hour in a building without air conditioning. The irony almost impressed me. Madison's had spent 14 months curating this wedding like it was a Netflix production. She had a 70-page aesthetic binder. I know because she emailed it to everybody with highlighted sections and font guidelines. Font guidelines for a wedding. Sage only, she'd written 3 different times. No bright colors, no distracting accessories, no visual disruptions. And now I was standing there dressed like a traffic cone. One of the makeup artists muttered, "I think maybe we have safety pins." My mother snapped her fingers toward a gift bag near the couch. There. She tossed me a small plastic box without looking at me. I caught it one-handed. That part almost slipped out before I stopped myself. 12 years in the army teaches you weird habits, catching falling objects, mapping exits automatically, remaining calm when people panic for stupid reasons, or when they humiliate you on purpose. Because by then I already knew this wasn't a shipping mistake. Madison wasn't smart enough to improvise something this specific under pressure. This took planning. The oversized fit, the wrong color, no matching shoes, no backup dress conveniently available. She wanted contrast. She wanted me looking awkward and bulky beside her polished influencer friends with their Pilates arms and matching spray tans. I looked down at my shoes. Black military Oxfords. freshly polished at 5:40 that morning in my hotel bathroom because the itinerary packet never mentioned footwear requirements. Of course it didn't. A bridesmaid with blonde extensions leaned closer to Madison and whispered something that made both of them smirk for half a second before fixing their expressions when they noticed me watching. There it was. Confirmation. Honestly, that hurt less than expected. Maybe because people can only rehearse disappointment so many times before it stops feeling personal. I sat down near the window overlooking the country club gardens and opened my sewing kit. The small olive green case had my initials stamped into the corner from deployment inventory processing 6 years earlier. Inside sat thread, needles, folding scissors, measuring tape, and a row of safety pins lined up with military neatness. My grandfather used to joke that I carried enough gear to survive a flood in a Target parking lot. Thinking about him tightened something in my chest. Not enough to cry, just enough to notice. Behind me, Madison laughed loudly while somebody filmed TikTok footage near the champagne wall. My mother immediately shifted into performance mode, smoothing Madison's veil and complimenting the floral arrangements, like she was auditioning to become First Lady of Connecticut. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody even asked if the dress fit. I threaded the needle anyway. The polyester scraped against my fingers while I pinned excess fabric behind my waist in careful folds, calculating balance points the same way I used to calculate cargo distribution on military pallets. Too much tension on one side, and the whole structure twisted crooked. Same rule applied to families. Have you ever realized somebody only kept you around because your silence made their life easier? And have you ever stayed quiet so long that people started mistaking your restraint for weakness? Comment below. And if you like stories about family, respect, and the moment people finally stop shrinking themselves for toxic relatives, subscribe to the channel. I tightened another safety pin inside the waist and felt the cheap polyester bunch under my fingers like wet grocery bags. The dress still looked ridiculous, just slightly more organized. Behind me, somebody turned up the music while the makeup team rushed around with brushes and curling irons. Madison was recording a slow-motion champagne video near the balcony doors while her maid of honor held a ring light over her head like she was filming a hostage release video for Instagram. "Wait," Madison said. "Do that pour again, but slower this time." One bridesmaid giggled. "You're insane." Madison smiled proudly. Content doesn't create itself. I stared down at the crooked orange fabric pooled around my knees and honestly thought that sentence explained my entire family better than 20 years of therapy ever could. Everything was content. Everything was presentation. Everything was about controlling the camera angle before anybody noticed the cracks. I folded another section inward and started stitching temporary anchors into the lining. My hands moved automatically, steady and efficient. 12 years in Army logistics teaches you how to make broken systems function long enough to survive inspection. That skill apparently transferred beautifully into weddings. The funny part was I used to think if I worked hard enough, my family would eventually see me clearly. Like maybe achievement operated like exposure therapy. You keep showing up with enough proof and eventually reality wins. Turns out reality loses constantly to aesthetics, especially in my mother's house. When Madison was 21, my parents paid $38,400 a year for her fashion merchandising degree at Halston Bay Institute outside Manhattan. My mother used to say the school's name like she was announcing Harvard Medical. Meanwhile, I spent my 21st birthday inside a plywood operations office in Kandahar, trying to figure out why 2 refrigeration units full of medical plasma got stranded near Bagram because somebody entered the wrong fuel classification code into the convoy system. Madison got apartment shopping trips in Soho. I got satellite phone calls at 2:17 in the morning about missing cargo manifests. Guess which daughter my mother described with more pride at dinner parties. Madison works in luxury branding, Patricia would say immediately. Then somebody would politely ask about me, and every single time my mother softened her voice slightly before answering. Sarah does government paperwork, not Army officer, not logistics command. Not supply chain operations across active combat zones, just paperwork. Like I spent 12 years alphabetizing printer forms in a basement somewhere. The first time she said it, I corrected her. The second time, she changed the subject. By the 6th or 7th time, I understood the assignment. female military officers made people uncomfortable in Patricia Jensen's social circles, especially the older country club wives who still acted shocked whenever a woman ordered whiskey without apologizing first. Madison's brand depended on soft lighting, curated femininity, and expensive helplessness. My actual existence apparently disrupted the mood board. So my mother edited me down into something easier to serve alongside Pinot Grigio. I remember one Christmas Eve maybe 4 years ago. Madison was explaining skincare partnerships to my Aunt Denise while I carved ham at the kitchen counter because apparently uniforms automatically qualify you for manual labor during holidays. A man named Rick Harmon asked where I worked. Before I could answer, Patricia laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Sarah's buried in military admin work somewhere. Honestly, I can't even keep track. Military admin work." At that exact moment, I had 73 soldiers assigned under my operational supervision. But sure, paper clips. I used to wonder whether my mother even realized she was doing it, whether the minimizing happened consciously, or if it had become instinct after so many years of protecting Madison from feeling overshadowed. Now, I think the answer was worse. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did Madison. Because people don't accidentally erase you the same way for over a decade. That takes coordination. I adjusted another seam near my ribs and caught my reflection in the window glass. The dress made me look broader than I was. The bright orange swallowed every line of my body, while the bulky shoulders threw off my proportions completely. It hit me all at once. This wasn't random humiliation. This was visual storytelling. Madison had spent years describing me as the unstable, awkward sister who disappeared for long stretches and couldn't quite fit into normal life. The orange dress completed the character. I wasn't supposed to look elegant beside her. I was supposed to look like proof. My stomach tightened as another memory snapped into place from the rehearsal dinner the night before. We'd been seated in the Sterling Estate Library while servers passed miniature crab cakes on silver trays. Wyatt's uncle had asked me a completely normal question. "So Sarah, where have you been stationed these past few years?" Before I even opened my mouth, Madison jumped in smoothly. "Oh, Sarah's had kind of a winding road," she said with a sympathetic smile. She took some time away to figure myself out. I nearly choked on my bourbon. Wyatt looked genuinely concerned. "That's good, though. Everyone needs time sometimes." Madison nodded softly like she was discussing a recovering addict instead of a major in the United States Army. "She's doing much better now. Much better now." I remember sitting there holding a glass that probably cost more than my first car payment, while 3 generations of wealthy strangers looked at me with polite pity. And I let it happen. Because correcting her would create tension. Because my mother would accuse me of ruining dinner. Because after years of this nonsense, silence starts feeling easier than explaining yourself to people determined not to understand you anyway. But sitting there now in that blazing orange disaster, while 6 women zipped themselves into tailored silk, I finally understood the full architecture of what Madison built. She didn't want a sister at her wedding. She wanted a prop. A carefully managed comparison standing slightly outside the frame so she could look more polished, more delicate, more successful, more lovable. And the worst part? My mother helped her build it brick by brick. Madison walked past me toward the mirror, stopping just long enough to glance down at the dress. "You actually fixed it better than I expected," she said casually. I looked up at her. For one second, I almost asked the question sitting in my throat. Why are you doing this to me? But the answer was already standing right in front of me, adjusting diamond earrings under perfect lighting. Because humiliation only works if somebody agrees to stay for it. And until now, I always had. I pushed the last safety pin through the inside seam hard enough to stab my thumb. A bright bead of blood surfaced instantly. I wiped it against the orange fabric before anybody noticed and stood up carefully from the chair near the window, the dress held together, barely. 14 safety pins hidden inside the lining were now performing structural miracles that should have qualified for federal infrastructure funding. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of white roses, string quartet music, and expensive people pretending they'd always loved one another. I stood 3 places down from Madison during the vows, while sunlight baked the garden lawn hard enough to shimmer against the marble fountain behind the altar. The polyester trapped heat under my arms within minutes. Meanwhile, the other bridesmaids floated around comfortably in breathable silk, like elegant woodland creatures in a shampoo commercial. Every wedding photo probably looked like before and after shots for climate control. Wyatt looked genuinely happy, which somehow made everything worse. He kept smiling at Madison like she hung the moon personally and gift-wrapped it in ivory ribbon. At one point during the vows, he actually got emotional when she mentioned loyalty and honesty. That nearly sent me into cardiac arrest. But I stayed quiet. Years of military ceremonies trained me how to stand still through almost anything. Weddings, funerals, promotions, casualty briefings. Once you learn how to keep a straight face while somebody informs a 19-year-old private his best friend isn't coming home, bridal nonsense loses a little intimidation factor. Still, by the time the officiant announced them husband and wife, sweat had collected under the synthetic collar of my dress, and the safety pins along my ribs felt like fishing hooks. The photographer cornered us immediately after the ceremony before anybody could escape toward cocktail hour. "All right, wedding party first," he said, flipping through pages on a clipboard while visibly panicking inside his own skin. "Family portraits after that. We're already about 17 minutes behind schedule." The man looked exhausted. Honestly, same. Guests drifted across the Eza State Gardens carrying champagne flutes while staff members rushed around adjusting floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first deployment bonus. Somewhere near the terrace, somebody dropped a tray of glasses and immediately whispered, "Oh my God," 6 times in a row, like a prayer. The photographer started arranging everyone near the stone staircase overlooking the gardens. Black tuxedos, soft sage dresses, neutral flowers. Then me, bright orange. Standing there in polished black military Oxfords because nobody had bothered to tell me the bridesmaids were supposed to wear nude Valentino heels ordered through some private bridal link Madison forgot to send. Or intentionally didn't send. Honestly, at that point, either option sounded equally believable. The visual contrast was so aggressive it almost became funny. I looked like a traffic cone accidentally assigned security detail at a luxury vineyard. One groomsman actually squinted at me before quickly looking away. Another bridesmaid kept adjusting her bouquet to partially block my dress whenever the photographer lifted his camera. Nobody said anything directly cruel that would have required courage. Instead, everybody did what wealthy people do best. They managed discomfort politely. The photographer kept trying to rearrange us without addressing this obvious problem, standing directly in front of him, glowing like a radioactive pumpkin. Maybe angle slightly inward. Click. No, wait. Switch sides. Click. Actually, taller people toward the back. Click. Every adjustment somehow ended with me still looking like a construction warning sign in the middle of an Easter-themed Pinterest board. Madison's smile tightened more after every shot. I recognized that expression immediately. It was the same face she made when restaurant lightings wasn't flattering enough for photos. My mother finally stepped in. Patricia moved quietly across the garden in her pale blue designer dress and touched the photographer lightly on the elbow. They walked several feet away near the hydrangea wall. I watched them talk while pretending not to. The photographer's eyes flicked toward me twice during the conversation. Patricia nodded calmly both times like they were discussing catering logistics instead of her own daughter. Then the photographer returned wearing the expression of a man approaching a wild animal with a tranquilizer dart. "Hey," he said carefully. "Would you mind stepping slightly over there for a few shots?" He pointed toward a massive floral pillar, wrapped in white roses and eucalyptus near the edge of the staircase. I looked at him. "Why?" His face tightened instantly. "Well, just to balance the color palette a little better. Balance the color palette." There it was. Not even subtle anymore. For a second, the entire garden went strangely quiet in my head. Not literally. I could still hear champagne glasses clinking and distant laughter and camera shutters snapping under the afternoon sun. But internally, something just settled. Because humiliation stops feeling confusing once somebody finally says the ugly part out loud. Balance the color palette. I glanced toward Madison. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked relieved. That hurt more than I expected. Not because she excluded me. Honestly, I'd been emotionally preparing for that my entire adult life. What hurt was realizing she truly believed I was the thing ruining the picture. Not the lie, not the cruelty. Me. I nodded once. Sure. The photographer exhaled so hard you'd think I'd just diffused a hostage situation. I stepped behind the floral pillar exactly where he indicated. From the main camera angle, my body disappeared almost entirely behind layers of white roses and greenery. Only one orange sleeve remained slightly visible near the edge. Problem solved. My own sister's wedding photos no longer had to conclude me. The photographer immediately relaxed. Perfect, he said brightly. That looks much cleaner. Cleaner. Jesus Christ. The camera shutters resumed firing, while Madison leaned into Wyatt's, smiling like luxury toothpaste advertising. My mother adjusted somebody's boutonniere. The bridesmaids laughed softly. The entire scene smoothed itself back into polished perfection within seconds. Like I'd never been there at all. And that's when I noticed her. An elderly woman sat alone on a stone bench near the edge of the garden beneath a row of trimmed hedges, silver cane resting between both hands. Gray suit tailored sharply enough to make everybody else look rented. No champagne glass, no smile, just watching. Completely still. Most people at weddings glance around casually. This woman observed people like she was cross-examining them in court. Her eyes landed directly on me. Not the dress. Not the awkward staging. Me. There was something unsettling about how quickly she seemed to understand the entire situation without hearing a single word. I recognized her from the rehearsal dinner. Beatrice Sterling, Wyatt's grandmother, old Boston money, the kind of wealthy where nobody needs to raise their voice because the room already belongs to them. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't react at all. She simply watched my mother reposition the wedding party while I stood hidden behind flowers like an embarrassing stain nobody wanted visible in daylight. And somehow that silent observation felt more dangerous than if she'd interrupted the entire wedding. Beatrice Sterling never stopped watching me for the rest of cocktail hour. Not openly. That would have been easier. Instead, every time I glanced across the terrace between clusters of wealthy strangers holding tiny crab cakes and discussing Nantucket property taxes, I'd find her somewhere nearby in my peripheral vision, quiet, observing, silver cane resting beside her chair like punctuation. Meanwhile, my mother acted like the photo incident never happened. Honestly, that was her favorite strategy. Patricia Jensen treated cruelty the same way luxury hotels treat plumbing disasters. Keep smiling, lower the lights, and distract everybody with champagne before someone important notices the leak. By sunset, the wedding guests had moved into the main reception hall inside Sterling Manor. The room looked like a billionaire's idea of modesty. Cream-colored walls, crystal chandeliers, live string quartet near the dance floor, white orchids hanging from gold ceiling installations that probably required their own insurance policy. Every table held 3 floating candles inside glass cylinders taller than wine bottles. Mine flickered beside an empty chair and a sweating glass of untouched Chardonnay at table 18. Naturally. Table 18 sat near the kitchen doors beside the service corridor where waiters kept rushing in and out, carrying trays of filet mignon. Every 30 seconds, the swinging doors opened and released a burst of noise from the industrial kitchen behind them. Clattering pans. Somebody yelling about salmon timing. The sharp smell of garlic butter and dish sanitizer. The premium seating experience. I sat between a distant cousin named Leah and an empty chair reserved for somebody who apparently canceled last minute. Leah spent most of dinner talking about essential oils and asking whether military bases allowed gluten-free meal plans. I answered with the emotional enthusiasm of a tax audit. At the center of the ballroom, Madison and Wyatt moved from table to table greeting guests, while photographers followed them like wildlife documentarians tracking endangered swans. Madison looked radiant. That's the annoying part about beautiful people who behave terribly. They rarely look like villains while doing it. The orange dress still glowed under the chandelier lights like an active emergency flare. I caught several guests glancing at it throughout dinner, before politely looking away. One older woman actually leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Maybe she's from the bride's side?" Like she was trying to solve a murder mystery. Honestly, fair question. A waiter placed my steak in front of me at exactly 7:43. Cold. Not room temperature. Cold, cold. Like somebody forgot it existed for 20 minutes beneath a silver serving dome. I almost laughed. Even my entree got socially excluded. Across the room, Madison tapped a champagne spoon lightly against her glass. The speeches were starting. Conversations faded immediately. Chairs shifted, phones lifted. Somewhere behind me, a woman whispered, "This is my favorite part." Of course it was. People love polished emotions when somebody else performs them. Wyatt spoke first, short, grateful. nervous in a genuine way that made me dislike him slightly less. He thanked his family, thanked the guests, thanked Madison for making every place feel like home. That line got applause. Then Madison stood up, and the entire room leaned toward her automatically. She held the microphone with both hands like she'd rehearsed the posture in advance, which honestly, she probably had. Madison practiced sincerity the same way Olympic athletes practiced vault routines. Perfect smile, soft eyes, measured pauses. "I know weddings are supposed to be about beginnings," she said gently. "But honestly, tonight I keep thinking about family." There it was, the performance voice. Different from her normal one, by exactly 15%, softer. Slower, just enough vulnerability to sound authentic without smudging mascara. She started thanking people individually. Wyatt, her bridesmaids, our mother. Then her face shifted. Subtle, calculated. "But there's one person I wish could been here tonight." My stomach tightened instantly. Grandpa, of course. Madison lowered her eyes briefly while several guests nodded sympathetically. "When my grandfather got sick 3 years ago," she continued, "everything in our family changed. I stopped touching my food. He was my best friend." Lie number 1. "My whole career got delayed because I stayed with him almost every night during SEMO." Lie number 2. "I remember sitting beside his hospital bed at 2 in the morning, holding his hand while machines beeped around us. By then I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. The ballroom disappeared around the edges. Not dramatically, not movie style. Just that strange numb tunnel your body creates when reality becomes too offensive to process normally. Because my grandfather didn't die in some cinematic private room with soft lighting and inspirational background music. He died at the Bedford VA hospital in room C214 after 7 months of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I was there. Not Madison. Me. I used every accumulated day of military leave I had saved across 4 years because the doctors told us near the end that time mattered more than schedules. I slept beside him in a vinyl recliner chair that squeaked every time I moved my back. The room smelled permanently like antiseptic wipes, stale coffee, and overheated ventilation systems. Around 4 o'clock every morning, the night nurse named Elena used to microwave oatmeal at the station down the hall, and the entire corridor smelled faintly like cinnamon for 20 minutes. I know exactly what cancer sounds like at 3 in the morning. I know the rhythm of off-oxygen machines. I know what morphine confusion looks like when a proud man apologizes for needing help lifting a water cup. Madison visited twice. Twice. The first visit lasted 27 minutes because she had a brand collaboration dinner in Boston afterward. The second time, she spent more energy taking photos near the hospital garden than speaking to our grandfather directly. And now she stood beneath a Swarovski crystal chandelier, stealing his death like it was content for a lifestyle podcast. Several guests wiped tears from their eyes. Wyatt looked emotional. My mother placed one hand over her heart like she was personally witnessing courage unfold in real time. Madison's voice cracked perfectly on cue. "I didn't care about promotions or opportunities back then," she whispered. "I just wanted him to know he wasn't alone." The room erupted into applause. Actual applause. I gripped my water glass so hard, my knuckles turned white against the crystal. For one horrible second, I genuinely thought it might shatter in my hand. But I stayed silent, because military training teaches you something most civilians never understand. Sometimes the hardest discipline isn't fighting back. It's maintaining control when somebody desperately wants you to lose it. Across the ballroom, through rows of applauding strangers, I noticed Beatrice Sterling again. She wasn't clapping, not even pretending to. She sat perfectly still at the Sterling family table with both hands folded over the silver cane, watching Madison with an expression so unreadable it made my chest tighten. Then slowly, very slowly, her eyes shifted toward me. And for the first time all night, somebody in that room looked like they understood exactly what had just been stolen. The applause kept going longer than it should have. That was the part that finally broke something loose inside me. Not Madison lying. Not my mother sitting there nodding proudly, while my grandfather's actual final months got rewritten into influencer-friendly tragedy. I already knew both of them were capable of that. It was the applause. 200 people clapping for a story built out of somebody else's grief. I stared down at the water glass still clenched in my hand and slowly loosened my fingers before I embarrassed myself by cracking crystal in the middle of the Sterling ballroom. Breathe in, breathe out. Basic control. Same thing they taught us during casualty response training. You stabilize yourself first, or you become another emergency somebody else has to manage. Around me, guests dab tears from their eyes while Madison is accepted sympathy, like a beauty queen receiving flowers during a parade. Wyatt kissed her temple gently. My mother looked emotional enough to deserve her own acting award. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not angry, past angry. Just tired in a deep cellular kind of way. The kind that builds over years when you spend your life carrying emotional weight nobody else even acknowledges exists. A waiter passed near my table carrying fresh champagne flutes, and I made my decision right there. I was leaving, quietly. No confrontation, no speech. No dramatic scene that my mother could later weaponize into another story about Sarah being difficult. I'd slip out through the kitchen corridor beside table 18, call a rideshare, and spend the rest of the night eating drive-through fries in a hotel room while watching terrible cable television. Honestly, that sounded incredible. I reached for my purse under the table, and then the room changed. Not loudly, the opposite. Silence started spreading outward in slow waves across the ballroom. At first, only a few conversations stopped. Then chairs stopped moving, forks lowered. Even the waitstaff seemed to pause instinctively. I looked up. Beatrice Sterling was standing. The old woman leaned heavily on her silver-handled cane as she rose from the Sterling family table near the dance floor. Somebody nearby moved automatically to help her, but she dismissed them with one small motion of her hand. Nobody spoke. That kind of silence only happens around people with real authority. Not social media influence, not fake charisma, real power. The kind built over decades of money, reputation, and people learning not to interrupt you. Beatrice didn't reach for the microphone, didn't smile, didn't offer a toast. She simply started walking. Slowly, deliberately, straight toward table 18. You could actually hear the soft tap of her cane against the marble floor between tables. Tap, step, tap, step. Every guest tracked her movement like they were watching a judge enter a courtroom. My mother's posture stiffened immediately. Madison's smile flickered for the first time all night. Wyatt looked confused. And I just sat there wondering why an elderly Boston aristocrat was approaching the family embarrassment table like she had unfinished business. Beatrice passed the head table without stopping. That seemed to unsettle Patricia more than anything else. "Beatrice," my mother called gently, forcing brightness into her voice. "Would you like the microphone?" Beatrice ignored her completely. Honestly, I almost respected her on the spot for that alone. She continued walking until she reached my table near the kitchen doors. Up close, she looked even sharper somehow. Gray hair pinned perfectly into place. Pale blue eyes, alert and steady. The kind of face that probably never needed to raise its voice because disappointment alone could financially ruin people. The ballroom stayed silent. I became painfully aware of the orange dress again. Under the chandeliers, the polyester practically glowed radioactive against the elegant cream-colored room. 14 hidden safety pins held fab fabric together beneath my arms, waist, and back while my polished military Oxfords reflected candlelight under the table. Beatrice looked down at me quietly for a moment, not with pity. That mattered. Most people looked at humiliation with either discomfort or entertainment. Beatrice looked at it like evidence. Then her eyes lifted toward the head table, toward Madison, toward Patricia. The silence stretched so long somebody near the bar accidentally dropped an ice cube scoop. Clatter, nobody moved. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "Major Jensen." The words landed in the room like broken glass. I felt my entire body go still. At the head table, Madison physically stopped breathing for half a second. Because she knew. She knew exactly what that title meant. And more importantly, she knew Wyatt's family had never heard it before. Beatrice's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Old money speaks with the confidence that people will lean closer instead of talking over it. "I believe," she said calmly, "you are sitting at the wrong table." Somewhere behind me, I heard a guest whisper, "Major?" Another voice answered quietly, "I thought the bride said she worked in administration or something." Bingo. There it was. The first crack in the performance. Wyatt turned slowly toward Madison with visible confusion spreading across his face. "Wait," he said carefully. "Sarah's a major?" Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out. My mother jumped in immediately, like she always did when Madison started drowning in her own lies. "Well, technically." Beatrice lifted one finger. That was all. Patricia stopped talking instantly. I have seen full colonels command less authority with direct orders than that old woman managed with one raised hand. Beatrice looked back at me. United States Army Logistics Command, if I recall correctly. I nodded slowly. Yes, Mom. The room got even quieter somehow. One of Wyatt's uncles blinked hard. Another guest lowered her champagne glass halfway without realizing it. Across the ballroom, the string quartet had completely stopped pretending to tune instruments. Madison stared at me like I'd betrayed her simply by existing accurately. That almost made me laugh. Beatrice studied the orange dress for one long second. Her eyes moved over the visible seam bunching near my waist, the uneven shoulder line, the cheap synthetic fabric fighting against expensive ballroom lighting. Then she glanced toward the bridal party in their custom sage silk. She understood immediately, every single detail. The exclusion, the setup, the intent. When she spoke again, her voice stayed perfectly calm. But now the room sounded afraid of it. I spent 43 years hosting charity galas in Boston, she said. And I've learned something useful about people. Nobody moved. A woman's character becomes very obvious by the way she treats the person she believes can't damage her reputation. Madison's face drained white so fast it looked medically concerning. And for the first time that entire day, I realized something important. The room was no longer operating under my mother's control. Nobody in that ballroom knew where to look first. At Madison, at me, at Beatrice Sterling, standing beside table 18 like she'd just discovered termites inside, the foundation of her family estate. The silence stretched long enough to become physical. Wyatt stood slowly from his chair at the head table. Madison's, he said carefully. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah was an army major. Madison's recovered fast. I'll give her that. Years of social media sponsorships had trained her nervous system like a hostage negotiator under studio lighting. Her smile returned quickly enough that most people might have missed the panic underneath it. Oh my God, she laughed softly, waving one manicured hand. Because Sarah hates military attention. She's always been super private about it. Interesting strategy. Unfortunately for her, I was sitting 15 feet away. Patricia immediately rushed forward in support mode. Exactly, my mother added brightly. Sarah never likes people making a fuss over her accomplishments. That almost made me choke. My accomplishments. That was rich coming from the woman who once introduced me to a surgeon at Thanksgivings as our government daughter. Beatrice didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't even look annoyed. She simply turned slightly toward Patricia and lifted one hand again. Silence, instant. Honestly, if that woman ever ran the Pentagon, global conflicts would end inside 48 hours out of pure intimidation. Patricia stopped talking mid-sentence. The room froze with her. Then Beatrice shifted her attention back toward Madison with a calmness so precise it became terrifying. You know, she said gently, after the rehearsal dinner last evening, I found myself thinking quite a bit about your grandfather. Madison blinked. The color had started fading from her face now. Slowly, unevenly, Beatrice continued. My late husband served on the board of Bedford Veterans Memorial Hospital for nearly 20 years. Lovely institution. Extraordinary oncology staff. My stomach tightened instantly. Oh no. Beatrice rested both hands on top of her silver cane. So this morning, she said conversationally, I made a few phone calls to arrange a memorial donation in your grandfather's honor. Nobody moved. Not even the waitstaff. I could literally hear ice melting inside somebody's abandoned drink near the dance floor. Wyatt looked between Madison and Beatrice with growing confusion. You called the hospital? Yes. Beatrice smiled faintly. The chief administrator was an old friend of my husband's, Harold Whitmore. Wonderful man. Still wears suspenders, like it's 1958. A few nervous chuckles floated weakly through the room. Madison didn't laugh. Neither did my mother, because they both finally understood where this was heading. Beatrice tilted her head slightly toward Madison. We spoke for nearly 30 minutes, she said, mostly about your grandfather's final months there. Madison swallowed hard. Oh, she managed quietly, yes. Beatrice nodded pleasantly. Harold told me a remarkable story. I felt my pulse start climbing. Across the ballroom, Wyatt slowly lowered himself back into his chair without taking his eyes off Madison. Beatrice continued speaking with the same soft politeness people use while discussing flower arrangements over lunch. He described a young woman in army uniform who spent 40 consecutive nights sleeping beside her grandfather in a vinyl hospital chair. The room went completely still, not socially still, funeral home still. He said the nursing staff had to practically force her to shower because she refused to leave for more than 20 minutes at a time. Beatrice glanced toward me briefly. Apparently, she reorganized half the medication schedule herself after noticing recurring delays during shift changes. A faint sound escaped one of the bridesmaids. Not words, just panic leaving the body. I stared down at my hands under the table because suddenly I couldn't handle 200 people looking at me at once. Beatrice kept going. Harold also mentioned this young woman coordinated military leave extensions from the hospital cafeteria using a government laptop balanced beside a vending machine. That part almost made me laugh. I completely forgot about the vending machine. It ate my debit card twice during week 3. Meanwhile, Madison looked like somebody had removed all oxygen from the ballroom, because here was the problem with lies: details kill them. Big dramatic lies survive surprisingly well if nobody asks follow-up questions. But tiny details, smells, chairs, cafeteria coffee, the name of a night nurse, those things destroy fake stories instantly. Beatrice finally turned fully toward Madison and smiled. Curiously, she said, Harold never mentioned a fashion student, Jesus Christ. Even the string quartet looked uncomfortable now. Madison opened her mouth, closed it again, then forced a shaky laugh that sounded medically unwell. Well, I mean, obviously Sarah helped too. Helped, Wyatt repeated sharply. That word landed hard, because suddenly even he heard it, the adjustment. The scramble, the desperate rewriting happening in real time. Madison's eyes darted toward my mother for rescue. Patricia stepped forward immediately. This is becoming wildly inappropriate. Tap. Beatrice struck her cane once against the marble floor. Not hard. Didn't need to be. Patricia stopped speaking again. The old woman looked back at Madison with almost clinical curiosity. Tell me something, dear. Madison visibly trembled. What exactly did the hospital room smell like? That was it. No screaming. No accusations. Just one simple question. And suddenly the entire ballroom understood there was only one correct answer. Madison stared at her. Nothing came out. Because people who invent grief always focus on visuals first. The brave smiles, the hand-holding, the dramatic speeches. But real memories live in sensory details. The smell of antiseptic wipes, overcooked vegetables from the cafeteria downstairs, plastic mattress covers warmed by hospital heating vents, stale coffee at 2 a.m. fear. Madison knew none of it. She stammered, her voice cracked. I mean, hospitals all kind of smell the same. Wrong answer. I closed my eyes briefly, because suddenly I could smell it again myself. The sharp chemical scent of disinfectant mixed with Grandpa's peppermint hand lotion because chemo made his skin crack around the knuckles. Azina's cinnamon oatmeal down the hallway before sunrise. The weird artificial butter smell from microwave popcorn nurses made during overnight shifts. 40 nights. I remembered everyone. Madison's face had gone completely white now beneath the bridal makeup. Beatrice watched her quietly for another second before finally turning toward my mother, and then she delivered the sentence that split the room open. A lie, she said calmly, is like a cheap fabric, Patricia. Her eyes flicked once toward my glowing orange dress. It always tears at the seams. Nobody applauded this time. Wyatt stood up so fast, his chair scraped violently across the marble floor. That sound snapped the entire ballroom awake again. For the past several minutes, everybody had been frozen inside Beatrice Sterling's quiet execution of the truth. Nobody wanted to breathe too loudly in case the old woman redirected her attention toward them next. But Wyatt wasn't looking at Beatrice anymore. He was looking at Madison. What the hell is she talking about? He asked. No performance voice now. No polished groom energy. Just confusion turning rapidly into anger. Madison shook her head immediately. Wyatt, this is getting twisted completely out of proportion. Did you lie about your grandfather? The room tightened again. Madison blinked rapidly. I didn't lie. You just said you stayed with him every night. I meant emotionally. Oh, for God's sake, Patricia snapped suddenly. There she was. The real Patricia Jensen finally arriving once the social strategy stopped working. My mother stepped forward quickly, eyes landing directly on me for the first time in almost 20 minutes. And there it was again. The expression I'd seen my whole life whenever consequences approached our family. This is your fault somehow. Sarah, she said sharply, you've always had a flair for drama, but humiliating your sister on her wedding day is honestly unbelievable. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable down to the sentence structure. A distant part of me noticed the room, waiting for my reaction. 200 wealthy strangers holding expensive drinks while watching the family's scandal portion of the evening unfold ahead of dessert service. And suddenly something inside me became very calm. Military calm, operational calm. The kind that arrives when panic becomes useless. I stood up slowly from table 18. The oversized orange dress shifted heavily around my legs as I rose. Under the chandeliers, the synthetic fabric looked even worse somehow. Cheap. Loud. Desperate for attention in exactly the same way Madison's lies had been. Nobody spoke. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving behind the swinging service doors. I reached calmly toward my waist and slid one of the safety pins loose from inside the dress lining. Click. The sound landed strangely loud in the ballroom. Then I placed the pin carefully onto the tablecloth beside my untouched water glass. No speech yet. Just the pin. Something about that tiny movement made several people visibly uncomfortable. Probably because humiliation looks different once the target stops cooperating with it. My mother crossed her arms immediately. Honestly, Sarah, this entire thing could have been avoided if you weren't always so resentful. Resentful. Interesting ojmilsern a woman standing beside a daughter, dressed in $12,000 of curated innocence. I looked at Patricia first, then Madison, and for the first time all night, neither of them seemed completely sure what I was about to say. Good, because I finally stopped worrying about protecting them from embarrassment they earned themselves. You put me in this dress to make me look like a joke, Madison. Silence, no yelling, no tears. That somehow made it worse. Madison's face tightened instantly. That is not true. I ignored her. You hid my rank because my actual life threatened the version of me you sold to these people. Wysat stared at his new wife like she'd suddenly switched languages mid-conversation. I continued calmly. You told strangers I was lost because it sounded better than admitting your sister outranked most men in the room. That one landed hard. I saw it happen physically across the ballroom, tiny posture shifts. Men straightening slightly. Guests recalculating the entire story they'd been fed all weekend. Madison shook her head harder now. You're twisting everything. No, I'm finally saying it out loud. The room stayed dead silent. Even Patricia looked nervous now. Not guilty, nervous. Because image-conscious people fear exposure more than cruelty. I glanced down briefly at the orange fabric bunching around my waist, where the missing safety pin had loosened one side of the dress slightly. Then I looked back at Madison. And you stole my grief to buy applause from strangers. That sentence hit her harder than anything else. I watched it happen. Her expression cracked, just for half a second. Because deep down, Madison already knew exactly what she did. That's why she needed the performance so badly in the first place. People who tell the truth don't usually rehearse emotional pauses in front of bathroom mirrors. Wyatt looked sick. Actually sick. Like somebody had poisoned his champagne 30 minutes earlier and the symptoms were finally arriving. Madison, he said slowly, did Sarah stay with your grandfather? Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Wrong answer again. Across the room, somebody quietly set down a fork. A bridesmaid near the dance floor looked like she desperately wanted to evaporate into furniture. My mother tried one final time. This family has always bent over backward to support you, Sarah. That almost impressed me. Even now, she still believed the problem was my reactions instead of their behavior. I turned toward Patricia fully. You spent 20 years teaching me that keeping peace mattered more than keeping dignity. Her face hardened instantly, because she heard the truth in that one. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me most. Standing there in an oversized orange dress held together by military safety pins while my sister's wedding collapsed in real time, I expected rage. Instead, I mostly felt finished, like finally setting down something heavy after carrying it too long. Wyatt rubbed one hand over his mouth and looked at Madison again. Why would you do this? Madison's eyes filled immediately with tears. Weaponized tears. Perfect timing. Classic Madison. I just wanted everything to be beautiful, she whispered. And there it was, the entire philosophy. Not honesty, not family, not respect. Beautiful. I looked at Wyatt then, really looked at him. And for the first time all day, I felt genuinely sorry for the man. Because he still didn't fully understand what he'd married. He thought tonight exposed one bad decision. In reality, he'd just witnessed an entire operating system. She's a beautiful illusion, Wyatt. The room stayed frozen around us. I gave him a small nod. Honest, almost sympathetic, Good luck with the maintenance. Nobody moved after that. Not immediately. Because sometimes the most devastating thing a person can do isn't scream. It's tell the truth calmly enough that everybody else has to sit with it. Nobody chased after me when I walked away from the ballroom. That was probably the clearest sign the truth had landed exactly where it needed to. I picked up my purse from table 18 while the room behind me stayed trapped in that weird frozen silence people fall into after watching something expensive break in public. No orchestra music, no clinking glasses. Just low, stunned murmurs beginning to spread from table to table like smoke under a door. I didn't look back immediately. Honestly, I didn't need to. I could already hear it unraveling behind me. Wyatt's voice first. Sharp now. Not confused anymore. Madison, answer me. Then my mother trying to regain control of the situation through pure force of personality. This is not the time for this conversation. The hell it isn't. That part almost made me smile. I kept walking. The oversized orange dress shifted awkwardly around my legs with every step, while one loosened side sagged slightly where I'd removed the safety pin. A few guests moved out of my path automatically as I crossed the ballroom. Not out of disgust anymore, out of discomfort. Because once people realize they applauded the wrong person, eye contact suddenly becomes very complicated. Near the dance floor, one of the bridesmaids quietly avoided looking at me altogether. Another mouthed, "I'm sorry," without sound. I gave neither of them a reaction. This wasn't their failure to carry. The kitchen doors swung open as I passed, releasing another burst of heat and noise from the service corridor. A line cook carrying trays of creme brulee paused long enough to stare toward the ballroom tension before muttering, "Rich people are exhausting? Honestly, fair assessment." I pushed through the side exit, near the Valley station, and cool night air hit my face instantly. For the first time all day, I could breathe properly. The estate grounds looked completely different at night. Soft gold lighting lined the stone pathways while the fountain outside reflected moonlight across the gardens, where everybody had pretended not to notice me earlier. Somewhere farther down the hill, I could still hear the string quartet packing equipment into black cases. The music had stopped. Good. The orange polyester finally cooled against my skin as the evening breeze moved through the fabric. I reached behind my back automatically and removed another safety pin from the dress lining. Click. Freedom in tiny increments. Behind the closed ballroom doors, voices had started rising louder now. Not screaming yet, but close. Wyatt again. "You lied to me in front of my entire family?" Madison's voice followed immediately after, fast, defensive, crying now. I was trying to protect the mood of the wedding. Jesus Christ. Even after exposure, she still framed life like an Instagram event schedule. My mother jumped in again somewhere behind the doors. "Sarah has always been jealous." I actually laughed out loud at that one, a real laugh. Short, tired, completely done. Because the amazing thing about finally seeing people clearly is how predictable they become afterward. The valet attendant spotted me near the front steps and hurried over holding a ticket scanner. "Leaving already, Mom?" "Yeah." He glanced once toward the ballroom entrance where muffled arguing kept leaking through the doors, then back at me. Probably smart. Another fair assessment. While he went to retrieve my car, I sat carefully on the stone ledge near the circular driveway and started removing the remaining safety pins one by one from inside the dress. 14 going in, 13 coming out. Metal clicked softly into my palm under the estate lights. Each pin carried tiny traces of pressure where I'd forced cheap fabric into temporary obedience hours earlier. That suddenly felt symbolic enough to annoy me. I slipped all the pins back into my military sewing kit carefully instead of throwing them away. Old habits, inventory matters. A soft tapping sound approached across the pavement behind me. Tap, step, tap, step. I looked up. Beatrice Sterling stopped a few feet away, beneath the valet canopy, silver cane resting beside polished black shoes. Neither of us spoke immediately. The night air carried faint traces of cigar smoke, roses from the garden hedges, and expensive rain-damp stone from the fountain nearby. Beatrice studied the orange dress quietly, not mockingly, almost academically, then her eyes lifted toward mine. "You handled that with restraint," she said. I shrugged lightly. "Military training." A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. "No," she said. "Character." That hit harder than I expected, because people had complimented my discipline before, my work ethic, my professionalism, my service record. But character? That one landed somewhere deeper. Behind us, the ballroom doors burst open briefly as somebody stormed halfway outside before turning around again. Wyatt's voice echoed sharply across the driveway. "I don't even know who you are right now." Then the doors slammed shut again. Beatrice didn't react, neither did I. The valet pulled my car around moments later. My old dark gray Audi looked hilariously normal beside the line of imported luxury vehicles crowding the circular drive. One rear taillight still had the tiny crack from a grocery store parking lot incident outside Fort Bragg 3 years earlier. Honestly, seeing something imperfect suddenly felt comforting. I stood and smoothed the wrinkled orange fabric once out of reflex. Beatrice watched me for another second before giving one small nod. Not sympathy. Respect. Woman to woman, the kind that doesn't need performance attached to it. In that moment, I understood something quietly important. Beatrice wasn't impressed by appearances because she'd spent her entire life around people using appearances as camouflage. Substance recognized substance. Everything else eventually collapsed under pressure. I opened the driver's door and slid into the seat carefully while the ruined orange dress bunched awkwardly beneath me one final time. Then I pulled down the rearview mirror. For a second, I just looked at myself. Smudged makeup, loose hair, cheap glowing polyester collar sitting crooked around my neck. And underneath all of it, something lighter than I'd felt in years. I smiled, a real one. Not polite, not controlled, not survival, just free. I drove away from the estate while the valet staff was still watching the ballroom windows for flying champagne glasses. I didn't wait to see whether Wyatt canceled the reception, and I didn't care how my mother planned to explain my empty chair to the country club elite. For 34 years, I had reduced myself into smaller and smaller versions just to fit inside a family that only valued my silence. Tonight, I finally became too large for their story to contain. I found the orange dress 3 weeks later stuffed inside a plastic hotel laundry bag in the trunk of my car. Honestly, I'd forgotten it was there. Life moved fast after the wedding. I flew back to Fort Liberty 2 days later, sat through a 70-minute logistics briefing about delayed equipment transfers, and spent most of the following week dealing with supply shortages that somehow involved 3 missing generators and a forklift operator named Kenny, who definitely should not have been trusted around heavy machinery. Real life has a funny way of continuing whether your family explodes or not. But that Thursday night, around 9:40, I opened my trunk looking for a gym bag and saw that glowing orange fabric shoved into the corner beside an old pair of running shoes. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I started laughing so hard I had to lean against the car, because once enough time passes, humiliation starts looking different. Less like a wound, more like evidence. I carried the dress upstairs to my apartment anyway. My place wasn't impressive. 1-bedroom military housing with beige walls and a refrigerator that hummed loud enough to sound emotionally invested in conversations. The air conditioner clicked every 30 seconds like it was fighting for survival against North Carolina humidity. But it was peaceful. Nobody in that apartment needed me smaller to feel comfortable. I tossed the dress across the couch and heated leftover Chinese food while staring at it from the kitchen counter like it might confess crimes under interrogation. And somewhere between the microwave beeping and my Loman going cold, I finally understood something that took me 34 years to learn. Toxic families rarely destroy you all at once. They train you. Slowly. Quietly. They reward you for being low maintenance. They praise you for keeping the peace. They teach you that swallowing disrespect makes you mature while reacting to disrespect makes you difficult. And after enough years, you start confusing self-erasure with love. That realization hit me harder than the wedding itself. Because the truth was, Madison didn't invent that dynamic alone. She inherited it. My mother built an entire family ecosystem around protecting the person who demanded the most emotional oxygen in the room. And people like me become very useful inside systems like that. Responsible people adapt automatically. We absorb pressure. We smooth conflict. We tell ourselves we're being strong when really we're just becoming easier to overlook. The military reinforced that part of me even more. In logistics command, emotions don't solve operational failures. If fuel shipments get delayed, you reroute supply lines. If equipment breaks, you improvise. If people panic, you stay calm enough for everyone else to function. Useful skill professionally. Terrible skill emotionally. Because I carried that same mindset into my family for years. Madison lies, adapt. Patricia minimizes your accomplishments, absorb it. Family gatherings leave you feeling invisible? Stay professional. Keep moving. At some point, I became so good at tolerating disrespect that people mistook my silence for permission. That's the part I really want people watching this story to understand. Most emotional manipulation doesn't begin with screaming or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it looks incredibly normal from the outside. Family jokes, small dismissals, being interrupted constantly. One sibling always receiving softness while another gets tough love. And if you grow up inside it long enough, you stop noticing how uneven everything feels. You just adapt to survive it. I think a lot of people watching this probably have their own version of that orange dress. Maybe not literally, but maybe you've sat at family dinners where somebody mocked your career until it became a personality trait. Maybe your accomplishments only counted when they benefited someone else's image. Maybe you became the easy child because asking for basic respect caused too much tension. That kind of damage sneaks up on people, especially competent people, because capable people usually believe if they just work harder, behave better, achieve more, stay calmer, or become more useful, eventually they'll earn the respect they keep chasing. Sometimes that works in careers. It fails miserably with emotionally dishonest people. One of the biggest lies families teach is this idea that keeping peace should always matter more than confrontation. But here's the problem. Peace and silence are not the same thing. Sometimes peace is healthy. Sometimes peace is just one person absorbing emotional damage quietly so everyone else can stay comfortable at brunch. That's not harmony. That's maintenance. And the people benefiting from your silence will almost always call you dramatic the second you stop cooperating with it. Ask me how I know. The weird thing is, after the wedding, I didn't actually feel rage toward Madison anymore. Embarrassment burns hot but fast. What stayed longer was grief. Not about the public humiliation, about the years. The years I spent shrinking myself voluntarily because I genuinely believed achievement would eventually force my family to respect me honestly. I thought if I became disciplined enough, successful enough, selfless enough, they would finally stop reducing me into whatever version made them comfortable. But some people don't misunderstand you accidentally. They misunderstand you strategically. Because the truth threatens the role they assigned you years ago. And honestly, that realization hurt more than the orange dress ever did. Not because my sister lied about me, because my mother preferred the lie. The truth complicated her version of the family. The lie kept dinner pleasant. And once I understood that clearly, something inside me finally stopped trying so hard to earn love from people who only felt comfortable around my silence. That's the real thing that changed after the wedding. Not my relationship with them, my relationship with myself. I didn't hear from Beatrice Sterling directly again after the wedding for almost 2 months. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a handwritten card showed up in my mailbox between a power bill and a grocery coupon flyer. No return address, just thick cream-colored stationery with my name written in sharp blue ink. Inside, there was exactly one sentence. Competence does not require permission to exist. No signature. Didn't need one. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that card for probably 10 straight minutes while my coffee went cold beside me. Because the truth is, that woman changed something important in my head that night at the wedding. Not because she defended me. I need to make that distinction clear. Beatrice didn't save me. This wasn't some fairy tale where a wealthy grandmother magically fixed years of family dysfunction with one dramatic speech. Life doesn't work like that. What mattered was simpler. Recognized me immediately. No performance required, no emotional begging, no shrinking. No explaining my worth in PowerPoint presentation format, while somebody else decided whether I deserved dignity. And honestly, I didn't realize how starved I was for that kind of respect until it happened. A lot of people confuse admirations with respect. Those are not the same thing. Madison got admiration constantly. Likes, compliments, attention, validation from strangers who thought carefully edited photos represented character. But respect? Real respect behaves differently. Real respect doesn't disappear when you become inconvenient. That's the part people need to pay attention to in their own lives. Watch how someone treats you once your truth becomes socially uncomfortable for them. That tells you everything. My mother respected appearances. Beatrice respected reality. Huge difference. Patricia Jensen spent most of her adult life managing perception like it was a second occupation. Every conversation had angles. every family story got polished before public release. Every uncomfortable truth needed softer lighting and better wording before guests arrived. And honestly, she was good at it. People like my mother usually are. That's why emotionally manipulative families confuse outsiders so easily. From a distance, everything looks functional. Holidays happen. Birthday cards get mailed. Photos get posted online with smiling captions underneath them. Meanwhile, somebody inside the family quietly becomes smaller every year. What shocked me most after the wedding wasn't Madison lying. It was how fast the illusion collapsed once somebody finally asked detailed questions. That's another thing I want people to understand. Manipulative people survive through vagueness. Details threaten them. Patterns threaten them. Specificity destroys them. That's why people like Madison hate direct conversations. They thrive in emotional fog where everything becomes about intentions instead of actions. Well, that's not what I meant. You misunderstood me. You're being too sensitive. It wasn't that serious. Notice how none of those phrases address actual behavior. They only manage reactions. After the wedding, I started thinking about how many years I wasted trying to defend myself properly to people already committed to misunderstanding me. That's exhausting work, by the way, and mostly pointless. You cannot explain yourself into fairness with someone benefiting from your confusion. That realization changed the way I handled relationships completely. I stopped over-explaining basic boundaries. Stopped writing emotional essays trying to prove my intentions were good. Stopped treating every disagreement like a courtroom where I needed enough evidence to deserve respect. Because healthy people don't require you to exhaust yourself emotionally before they acknowledge your humanity. That was probably the biggest lesson I learned from Beatrice. Secure people do not panic around competence. Insecure people do. Think about it. Madison needed me diminished because my real life disrupted the identity she built around herself. My mother minimized my career because strength in one daughter threatened the image she carefully crafted around the other one. But Beatrice, that woman had actual confidence, actual authority. And people with real confidence usually don't need to reduce others to feel stable. They can tolerate truth, even uncomfortable truth, especially uncomfortable truth. I've had a lot of viewers ask over the years how to deal with manipulative relatives without losing your mind emotionally. Honestly, start observing patterns instead of excuses. That changes everything. Pay attention to who only supports you privately, but disappears publicly. Pay attention to who protects you when there's social risk attached. Pay attention to who constantly reframes your achievements into something smaller or less threatening. And please hear me when I say this. Politeness is not kindness. My mother was extremely polite. Madison was socially polished enough to build an online following around being warm and uplifting. Neither one behaved with dignity when it mattered. That distinction matters more than people realize, because manipulative people often look incredibly pleasant in low-pressure environments. The real test happens when honesty threatens their comfort, status, image, or control. That's when character shows up. And sometimes strangers will recognize your value faster than your own family ever will. That sounds painful at first, but honestly, it becomes freeing eventually. The wedding forced me to accept something I spent years resisting. Some relationships survive only while you remain useful to the emotional system around you. The second you stop shrinking, the system reacts. That doesn't mean you're wrong. Usually, it means you finally became visible. And weirdly enough, once I accepted that, I stopped feeling angry all the time. I don't hate my mother. I don't even hate Madison anymore. Distance removed the fantasy that they would suddenly wake up transformed if I just loved them correctly enough. People change when truth matters more to them than comfort. And unfortunately, not everybody reaches that point. I wish I could tell you the wedding ended with some dramatic Hollywood explosion where Madison got exposed online. Wyatt annulled the marriage immediately, and my mother suddenly realized she'd spent decades emotionally feeding the wrong daughter. That's not what happened. Real life usually moves quieter than that. Messier too. About 4 months after the wedding, Wyatt called me once. Not for reconciliation, not for closure. Honestly, I think he just needed confirmation that he wasn't crazy. We met at a coffee shop outside Raleigh around 6:15 on a Tuesday morning because apparently rich people also become emotionally unstable before sunrise. He looked exhausted, not heartbreak exhausted, pattern recognition exhausted. That specific kind of tired people get once they finally realize one lie was actually connected to 50 smaller ones. He stirred the same cup of coffee for almost 2 straight minutes before speaking. She lies about weird things, he said finally. I didn't answer, didn't need to. She told me her college roommate stole jewelry from her sophomore year. Turns out there was never any police report. He shook his head slowly. Then I found out she faked brand partnership numbers with one of her sponsors. There it was. Not one giant evil scheme, just constant small manipulations held together by presentation and confidence. That's usually how it works. People imagine dishonest individuals living like criminal masterminds. Most of the time, they're just ordinary people who became addicted to controlling perception because reality stopped feeling good enough. Wyatt rubbed both hands over his face. I don't even know what's real anymore. And honestly, that was the saddest part of the entire situation. Not the wedding, not the dress. Watching a man realize he married somebody who treated truth like optional decoration. I told him something my grandfather used to say during card games whenever somebody tried bluffing too aggressively. If someone lies constantly, eventually they lose track of which version of themselves they sold to which audience. Wyatt laughed weakly at that. Then he asked if I hated Madison. I thought about it seriously before answering. No, I said finally. But I think she spent so much time performing a life that she doesn't know how to exist without an audience anymore. That shut him up for a while. We never became friends after that conversation. Honestly, that would have been weird for everybody involved. But 6 months later, I heard through a cousin that they separated quietly. No public scandal, no explosive divorce posts online. Just distance. Apparently, Wyatt discovered several more curated truths during the marriage that became harder to ignore once the wedding illusion cracked open. As for my mother, Patricia did what emotionally manipulative people usually do after exposure. Damage control. About 3 weeks after the wedding, she emailed me a 5-paragraph message that somehow used the words family healing 12 times without including a single actual apology. That part almost impressed me creatively. According to Patricia, everyone had simply become overwhelmed emotionally, and certain moments were misunderstood under pressure. Classic. Notice how people like that always describe betrayal like bad weather, nobody caused intentionally. I never answered the email. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally understood something important. Closure does not require mutual agreement. You do not need someone to admit wrongdoing before you're allowed to protect your peace. That lesson changed my life more than the wedding itself. I stopped attending gatherings where respect felt conditional, stopped minimizing my accomplishments to avoid intimidating insecure people, stopped translating my personality into softer language so others could remain comfortable around me. And honestly, life became much quieter after that, in a good way. I started sleeping better, started laughing more naturally, started noticing how exhausting it actually was, spending years triggering yourself emotionally to avoid triggering other people's jealousy, insecurity, or need for control. That kind of hyper-awareness drains people slowly, especially inside families. And I really want viewers listening to this to hear me clearly on this part. If someone only accepts the version of you that stays agreeable, silent, smaller, less successful, less direct, or emotionally convenient for them, that is not love, that is management. Healthy relationships survive honesty. Controlling relationships survive compliance. Huge difference. And boundaries are not cruelty. Distance is not betrayal. Protecting your dignity does not make you selfish. I think a lot of people stay trapped in toxic family systems because they confuse guilt with responsibility. They think choosing peace for themselves automatically means they failed as daughters, sons, siblings, or partners. Sometimes, leaving the dysfunction is the healthiest thing you can do for everyone involved, even if they never admit it, especially if they never admit it. I still think about my grandfather sometimes when I'm driving home from base late at night, usually small memories. The way he folded newspapers into perfect squares after reading them. The terrible but enthusiastic scrambled eggs he made every Sunday. The fact that he called every remote control the clicker until the day he died. For a while after the wedding, Madison's speech contaminated those memories for me. I hated that. But eventually I realized something freeing. Dishonest people cannot steal experiences they never earned. I was there. I know what happened. Love leaves witnesses inside the people who actually carried it. And weirdly enough, The orange dress means something completely different to me now, too. At first, it represented humiliation. Now, it reminds me of the exact night I stopped volunteering to disappear inside other people's stories about me. Some people spend their entire lives trying to look perfect in photographs. I'd rather be the person who can still recognize themselves after the camera is gone. And if you stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Seriously. I'd love to hear your experiences with toxic family dynamics, favoritism, emotional manipulation, or the moment you finally chose self-respect over keeping the peace. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about dignity, boundaries, betrayal, healing, and rebuilding yourself honestly, subscribe to the channel because there are a lot more conversations we still need to have.